Hello and welcome to the Absolute Beginner Guitar Lesson Series. My name is Oliver and today's lesson is lesson number 35. Today's lesson is a follow-up or a part 2 of the lesson on minor scales. That is lesson number 32. And the reason that I wanted to have this second follow-up is because the first lesson, while it was very good theoretically, left out quite a bit of maybe more useful information. And I guess what I want to say is that there are several different types of minor scales. And for this reason, it can get confusing when you're dealing with minor scales. However, there are always ways that you can make things easier to remember and less confusing. And when I think of minor scales, I like to look at the natural minor scale, and I like to see other minor scales as alterations of the natural minor scale. So what I have here is I have the A natural minor, as I'm calling it. I've also heard it referred to as the pure minor scale, or the Aeolian mode. And essentially we have, starting with the note A, we have A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. And of course this is a really good scale to sort of start to work with because it's sort of the minor version of the C major scale. There are no sharps and flats in it, and this is an easy scale to remember. Really all we have to do is start with the note A and just proceed through the letters of the musical alphabet until we come back to A. So I have the natural minor scale here, and I have the notes of the scale numbered. And I also have indicated in the blue writing whether the scale tone chords associated with the notes of the scale are major, minor, or diminished. Now I don't want to spend a whole lot of time as far as explaining where these scale tone chords come from, but I guess I'll just say that a chord can be built on each note of the scale, and there's a simple method for getting the notes of the chords. And just really quickly, we start with the root note of the chord we want to derive, and if we wanted to derive a 3-note chord that is based on the A note, we would start with the A, take the A note, then we would skip over the next note B and take the C, and we would skip over the next note D and take the E. So we would end up with the notes A, C, and E, and those would be the notes of our A minor chord. And we basically could follow this for every note of the scale and come up with a 3-note chord. Now, in some of the other lessons that I have out there, I delve deeper into why these chords are called major, minor, where the theory of them comes from. But suffice it to say, for the natural minor scale, when we look at the scale tone chords, these are sort of similar to the scale tone chords that we have when we're dealing with a major scale. However, we have 3 major chords, 3 minor chords, and 1 diminished chord. They just happen to fall in different places when we look at the minor scale as opposed to when we're looking at the major scale. So this is a natural minor scale, and this will give you a set of chords to work with. However, this is limited. I mean, we can do a lot with this. However, there's much more we can do when we're playing in a minor key. And what I'd like to do is start to look at that. And I want to take a look at a couple different minor scales. And the first minor scale I want to look at is what's known as the harmonic minor scale. So I'm just going to quickly try to write in harmonic here. And as I stated before, it's my belief that the best way to look at these other minor scales are as alterations of the natural minor scale. So what we want to do is we still have the natural minor scale here. But to get the harmonic minor scale, we just take this natural minor scale and we're going to raise the 7th note here by a half step. So the note associated with 7 here in this case is G. So I'm going to raise this by a half step. And by doing that, I've turned the scale from a natural minor scale into the harmonic minor scale. It's that simple. The way I like to try to remember this is for the harmonic minor scale, it is the natural minor scale with a raised 7th. So now the thing about this is once we start changing notes in the scale, it affects our chords. And the best way to sort of show it is for us to sort of go ahead and to derive the scale tone triads for this harmonic minor scale. And again, we're going to do it the same way we did for other scales. So let's just work through that quickly. If we start with the A, we'll get the notes A, C, and E. Now, these are the same notes we get when we derive a chord using the natural minor scale. And it is an A minor chord. So our 1 chord is minor. So let's take a look at, let's derive a chord for the B. Now, when we get to the B, we have the B, and then we skip over the C to take the D, skip over the E, and we have the F. So the notes that we end up with are B, D, F. And these are the same notes that we would end up if we were deriving a scale tone chord and we had the pure minor scale here. So this is a diminished triad. The 1 chord is still minor and the 2 chord is still diminished. So let's take a look at the C note. When we go to derive the chord for the C, something different happens. We start with our C, skip over that D, and we get the E. However, when we skip over the F, we get G sharp. So we now have different notes to our chord. And what we have now is what's known as an augmented triad. Now, for anyone who's not familiar with this stuff, I do suggest you take a look back through some of my earlier lessons. So when we move on to the D, if we derive our chord, we start with D, and then we have F, and then we have A. So these chords are a D, these notes form a D minor chord. So I'm just going to write the minor in there. Moving on to the E, we start with the E and we skip over the F, but now instead of G, we have G sharp. So we have a different chord than we had before. We have the E, the G sharp, and then finally we add the B note to that. So now what we have is we have an E major triad. So moving on, starting with the F, we have the F, and we have the A, and we have the C. So we have an F major chord. And finally, when we move to the G, we start with the G sharp, and then we have the B and the D. Now, where before we had a G and the B and the D, our chord was G major. But now because we have G sharp for our root note, this triad becomes a diminished triad. So now when we take a look at what we have, there have been some changes. The 1 chord is still a minor chord, and the 2 chord is still a diminished triad. The 3 chord, however, now has become augmented because of the G sharp note. So now when we look at the 4 chord, in this case the D chord, it remains minor. So this is of the first 4 chords that we have here, 3 of them are the same as the same triads we have associated with the natural minor scale. However, because of the presence of this G sharp note, our C chord becomes augmented. So next I'd like to direct your attention to the E chord. And this chord has been changed as well. And again, it's because of the nature of the fact that we changed the G note to the G sharp note. So now we have E and G sharp in B. Let's just keep moving on. For the 6th chord, we have the F, the A, and the C. So that the notes of this chord aren't really affected by this G sharp note. So this chord remains a major chord. And finally, when we look at our 7 chord, because we start with the G sharp now and we add the B and the D, it now becomes a diminished chord. And that's just because of the nature of the relationship between the B and the D to the G sharp. So what I want to point out here is now we have a new set of scale tone chords. So let's just continue and let's take a look at another minor scale. And just to avoid confusion, let me just take these indications out here. So again, we started with the natural minor scale. And with the natural minor scale, for A minor, we just had A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. All natural notes. When we went to the harmonic minor scale, we raised the 7th. So the G became G7th. Now I want to take a look at the melodic minor scale. And the melodic minor scale contains the raised 7 that is in the harmonic minor scale. However, with the melodic minor scale, what we're going to do is we're also going to raise the 6. So now our F becomes F sharp. So we've changed 2 of the notes of the natural minor scale. So this gives us the melodic minor scale. The harmonic minor scale has the raised 7th. The melodic minor scale has the raised 6th and 7th. Now we have changed another note in the scale. So when we go to derive our scale tone chords, we're going to get some differences. So let's just take a look at them. If we start with the A, we're going to get A, C, and E. And as you probably can observe, when we're dealing with these minor scales and the scale tone chords, the 1 chord is always minor. Our alterations here have no effect on the 1 chord. So that's easy to remember. So now let's take a look at our 2 chord, our B chord. So if we start with our B, we'll get the B, skip the C, that gives us the D. We skip over the E, now we have F sharp here. So our notes become B, D, F sharp. And now we have a B minor chord. So let's continue on. Let's take a look at the C that we have here. We have the C. We skip over the D and we'll take the E. And we'll skip over the F sharp and we get the G sharp. We have an augmented triad, excuse me. So let's continue on. Let's take a look at the D. When we look at the D, we have the D note and we now have the F sharp note. And skip over that G sharp, we have the A. So now our notes are D, F sharp, and A. So what we have now is we have a D major triad. So we have our D major chord now as a 4 chord. And when we look at our E chord, now we have E, G sharp, and B. So our E chord is now an E major chord. And moving on, now we have an F sharp chord. So we start with an F sharp, and our next note becomes A, and then our next note becomes C. So we now have a diminished triad. So now our 6th chord is diminished. And finally, let's take a look at our 7th chord. We have a G sharp note here, and then we have the B note, and finally we have the D note. And now our G sharp triad is also a diminished triad. Let me just take this stuff out of here. We have the 1 chord as minor and the 2 chord as minor. And these are the only 2 minor chords that we have. We have the 3 chord as augmented. The 4 chord and the 5 chord are both major. And the 6 chord and the 7 chord are both diminished. I'm just gonna take this down to the natural minor scale here, okay? And what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna write and sort of compare and contrast the scale tone chords for each of the type of scales. So when we have the natural minor scale, our 1 chord is minor, our 2 chord is diminished, our 3 chord is major, our 4 chord is minor, our 5 chord is minor, our 6 chord and our 7 chords are both major. So this is the natural minor scale. I'm going to try to write off here a little more. Not sure whether I'm going to go off the screen, but I don't want to crowd. But I'm just writing over here that natural, and then a sort of an indicator of what we have with the scale tone chords. Now, if we go to the harmonic minor, and remember the harmonic minor is the one where we have the raised 7th. When we go to the harmonic minor, we still have the 1 chord as minor, and the 2 chord is still diminished. However, when we get to the 3 chord, because now we have the G sharp note, the 3 chord becomes augmented. And so our 4 chord is minor. And when we get to our 5 chord, because again we've added the G sharp note for the harmonic minor scale, our 5 chord becomes major. When we look at our 6 chord, we still have the F, the A, and the C. So our 6 chord, it stays major. However, when we get to the 7 chord, because we have a G sharp here, our 7 chord now becomes diminished. And finally, let's take a look at what happens when we raise the 6th and the 7th notes and we get the melodic minor scale. So now this is where we start to see probably the most changes. So here what happens is we still have our A minor chord as our 1 chord, but we've raised the 6th, which is the F sharp. So when we get to our B chord, we end up with B, D, F sharp. So now instead of it being diminished, it becomes a minor triad. And when we get to the 3 chord, we still have the C, E, and the G sharp. So our 3 chord is augmented. The 4 chord now, because we have the raised 6th, which gives us the F sharp, we now have D, F sharp, and A. So our 4 chord becomes major. In our 5 chord, we have the raised 7th, which is represented by the G sharp. Our 5 chord becomes major as well. Now our 6 chord because we have F sharp here, now we have F sharp, A, and C, our sixth chord becomes diminished. And finally, our seventh chord, remember we have a G sharp here, becomes G sharp, B, and D. So our seventh chord is also diminished. When we use these three scales, the rules that we can apply are basically this. The one chord is always minor. The two chord will either be diminished or minor. And if we look here, the three chord is either major or augmented. When we look at the four and the five, these chords, the four chord can be either major or minor, and the five chord can be either major or minor. So for the sixth chord, according to what we have here, is either going to be major or diminished. When we go to the seven, we have it's either going to be major or it's going to be diminished. So if you sort of observe some basic rules, and I'm going to just review them really quick, and the best way to do is just to write this down. The one chord is always minor. The two chord can be either minor or diminished. The three chord can be major or augmented. The four chord can be major or minor. The five chord can be major or minor. The sixth chord can be major or diminished. The seventh chord can be major or diminished. So that's it. That's the basic fundamental lesson. And the important thing that I want you to understand is that the natural minor scale can be altered. And there's several different ways to alter the scale. What we've looked at is a couple variations of the minor scale. The first one we looked at was the harmonic minor. And if we want to use the harmonic minor, we sharp or raise the seventh. And that gives us our harmonic minor and will give us this set of scale tone chords when we derive using these notes. And we can also raise the sixth. So when we go ahead and we raise the sixth and the seventh, we now have the melodic minor scale, and that gives us another set of scale tone chords. So while minor scales can be somewhat confusing when you're trying to learn, and especially if you're trying to commit things to memory, what I want you to understand is there's so much variety with what you can do as far as chords. And that's it. That's the lesson. Put in your time, put in your work, and I hope to see you there. Peace.